"Nah, you're worthless without me," he yelled. Then Forbes magazine called to interview me for their cover. "You're worthless without me," he yelled, his voice echoing through the marble foyer of the penthouse apartment I'd once called home. The champagne flute in his hand trembled with rage, and for a moment I thought he might throw it at me. But no, Daniel Whitmore was too calculated for that, too concerned with appearances. The neighbors might hear. Instead, he set it down with deliberate precision on the Italian marble counter, each movement designed to remind me of everything I was supposedly losing by walking away. I stood there with my single suitcase, the one I'd brought into this relationship 3 years ago, watching him perform his final act of superiority. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline like a monument to his success he never tired of reminding me I could never achieve on my own. The city lights blurred through my tears, but I refused to wipe them away. Let him see me cry one last time. Let him think he'd won. "Go ahead," he continued, his Princeton-educated voice dripping with contempt. "Run back to your pathetic little studio apartment in Brooklyn. See how long you last without my connections, without my money, without me opening doors for you." He laughed, that cold, practiced laugh he used in boardrooms when crushing smaller companies. "You'll be begging to come back within a month, but I won't take you back, Emma. This is your one chance to stay, to apologize, to admit that everything you have is because of me." I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, my knuckles white against the worn leather. 23 years old, and I felt ancient, exhausted. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. A tiny spark of defiance that 3 years of his systematic destruction hadn't quite managed to extinguish. "Goodbye, Daniel," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of his German appliances and the distant sound of traffic 40 floors below. He didn't even look at me as I walked toward the door. He'd already dismissed me, already moved on to scrolling through his phone, probably texting one of the models from his agency who'd been waiting in the wings. "You'll never amount to anything without me, Emma," he called out, not bothering to look up. "You're nobody. You were nobody when I found you, and you'll be nobody when I'm done with you." The elevator ride down felt like descending into hell. Each floor that passed seemed to strip away another layer of the life I'd built, or thought I'd built, over the past 3 years. By the time I reached the lobby, with its intimidating doormen who'd never quite looked me in the eye, I felt transparent, invisible. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I was nobody. But if you're watching this, if you've ever been told you're worthless, that you're nothing without someone else, then you need to hear what happened next, because sometimes the very words meant to destroy us become the fuel that ignites our transformation. Sometimes being reduced to nothing is exactly what we need to remember who we really are. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has been preparing something extraordinary for us all along. We just couldn't see it through the shadow of someone else's ego. So before I tell you about the Forbes call, before I reveal how I went from that broken girl with a suitcase to building something that would dwarf Daniel's empire, I need you to understand where I came from, because this isn't just my story. It's for every person who's been made to feel small, worthless, invisible. If that's you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what I'm about to share might just change how you see your own worth forever. My name is Emma Chen, though for 3 years I was just Daniel's girlfriend. It's funny how quickly you can lose yourself in someone else's identity, how imperceptibly your own dreams get replaced by someone else's vision of who you should be. But to understand how I ended up in that elevator, crying and clutching my suitcase like a life raft, I need to take you back to the beginning. I met Daniel at a startup conference in San Francisco. I was fresh out of UC Berkeley with a computer science degree and more ambition than sense. My parents, first-generation immigrants from Taiwan, had sacrificed everything for my education. My father drove a taxi for 16-hour shifts. My mother cleaned offices at night after working at a dry cleaner during the day. They lived in a cramped apartment in Chinatown, saving every penny so I could have the opportunities they never did. At the conference, I was presenting my senior project, an AI algorithm that could predict market trends in emerging technologies with 87% accuracy. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd spent 2 years developing it, coding through the night, surviving on instant ramen and determination. The presentation room was small, tucked away in a corner of the convention center. Maybe 12 people showed up, most of them probably just looking for a place to sit and check their emails. But Daniel was there. Daniel Whitmore, the golden boy of venture capital, heir to an investment firm fortune, with his Harvard MBA and his perfect smile and his handmade Italian shoes that probably cost more than my parents made in a month. He sat in the front row, actually taking notes, his blue eyes focused on my presentation with an intensity that made me stumble over my words. Afterwards, he approached me. "That algorithm," he said, "it's brilliant. Rough around the edges, sure, but the core concept, it's revolutionary." No one had ever called anything I'd done revolutionary before. My professors had been encouraging but measured. My parents were proud but didn't really understand what I did. But here was Daniel Whitmore, someone whose opinion actually mattered in this world, telling me I was brilliant. "You need polish, though," he continued, his hand touching my elbow gently, guiding me away from the crowd. "The tech is solid, but your presentation skills, your networking, that's what's holding you back. I could help you with that." I should have heard the condescension in his offer. I should have noticed how his compliment came wrapped in criticism. But I was 20 years old, desperate to make my mark, and here was a door opening that I never thought would even crack. We had coffee that afternoon. He told me about his firm, about the companies he'd helped build from nothing into unicorns. He asked about my background, seemed genuinely interested in my parents' story, my struggle to fit in at Berkeley, where most of my classmates came from wealth and privilege I couldn't fathom. "You're hungry," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I can see it in your eyes. That hunger, properly channeled, could take you far. But you need someone to guide you. This world," he gestured vaguely at the conference happening around us, "it has unspoken rules, codes. I could teach you." Within a month, we were dating. Within 3 months, he'd convinced me to move to New York to work for his firm as a technical consultant while I refined my algorithm. He set me up in a beautiful apartment, just temporarily, he said, until you get on your feet. He introduced me to his circle, took me to gallery openings and charity galas where I felt like an imposter in borrowed dresses. At first, it was intoxicating. I was learning so much about business, about networking, about how the world really worked above a certain income bracket. Daniel was charming, attentive, generous. He bought me a new laptop when mine crashed, enrolled me in a public speaking course, introduced me to potential investors for my algorithm. But slowly, so slowly I didn't notice it happening, my project became our project. My algorithm needed refinements that always seemed to align with Daniel's vision rather than mine. When I worked late on coding, he'd comment on how I was neglecting us. When I wanted to present at conferences, he'd point out all the ways I wasn't ready yet, how I'd embarrass myself, and by extension, him. "Your code is solid," he'd say, "but Emma, sweetie, you have to understand that's only 10% of success. The other 90% is presentation, connections, knowing how to play the game. And frankly, you're still so unpolished." Unpolished became his favorite word for me. My clothes were unpolished. He replaced them. My speaking style was unpolished. He coached me, correcting me constantly until I dreaded opening my mouth at dinners. My networking was unpolished. He spoke for me at events, introducing me as his brilliant but shy girlfriend who was learning the ropes. Within a year, I'd moved into his penthouse. "It doesn't make sense for you to pay rent when you're here all the time anyway," he reasoned. "Plus, you can save money for when you're ready to launch your company." But somehow, I was never ready. There was always another skill to master, another connection to make, another reason to wait. My algorithm, the one he'd called revolutionary, sat on my laptop, untouched for months at a time as I became consumed with being the girlfriend Daniel wanted me to be. He had rules, though he never called them that. They were suggestions or advice or just trying to help you succeed. Don't wear my hair up. It made my face look too round. Don't laugh so loudly. It wasn't sophisticated. Don't talk about my parents' jobs. It made people uncomfortable. Don't mention my childhood poverty. It made me seem like I was looking for pity. You have to understand, Emma, he said one night after I'd apparently embarrassed him by admitting I'd never been skiing before. People at this level don't want to hear struggle stories. They want to believe success is natural, effortless. Your background, it's a liability. My background, my parents, my culture, my history, all liabilities to be hidden, minimized, erased. I started lying to my parents about how often I saw them. Sunday dinners in Chinatown became monthly, then every other month, then just holidays. Daniel always had something important those weekends: a client dinner, a weekend in the Hamptons, a charity event where my presence was crucial for his image. Your parents are lovely people, he'd say with that patronizing smile. But Emma, you have to think about your future. Do you want to be stuck in that world, or do you want to rise above it? The worst part was, I started to believe him. I started to see my parents' accents as embarrassing, their small apartment as shameful, their sacrifices as something to distance myself from rather than honor. I became exactly what Daniel wanted, a hollow, polished shell that looked good on his arm and never challenged his worldview. My algorithm gathered digital dust. Whenever I mentioned working on it, Daniel would find a reason why the timing wasn't right. The market wasn't ready. I needed more business experience first. I should wait until after his firm's big merger, after the summer social season, after. 2 years passed in this fog of diminishment. I woke up one morning and didn't recognize myself in the mirror. Designer clothes hung on my frame. I'd lost weight because Daniel preferred me lean. My hair was perfectly styled in the way he liked. My makeup was subtle, sophisticated, boring. I looked like every other woman in his social circle, polished, pretty, empty. That was the day I opened my laptop and looked at my algorithm for the first time in 6 months. The code looked foreign to me, like something written by a stranger. But as I scrolled through it, remembering the late nights and early mornings I'd spent building it, something stirred in my chest, a memory of who I used to be. I started working on it in secret. When Daniel was at the office, I'd code. When he traveled for business, I'd refine the algorithm, update it with new data, improve its accuracy. It was like remembering how to breathe after holding my breath for 2 years. The algorithm had evolved, improved to 94% accuracy. I started testing it quietly, using small amounts of my own savings, what little I had, to make investments based on its predictions. Every single one paid off. Within 3 months, I'd tripled my money. Within 6 months, I had enough to potentially start my own firm. That's when I made my mistake. I told Daniel. I was so excited, so proud. I thought he'd be proud too. After all, he'd been the one to call it revolutionary. He'd been the one to see its potential. But the moment I told him, his face changed. The warmth drained from his eyes, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You've been working on this behind my back?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Not behind your back," I protested. "I just wanted to surprise you, to show you I was ready." "Ready?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emma, this algorithm, we developed it together. It's based on insights from my firm, my connections, my mentorship. You can't just take it and run with it. But I created it before I even met you. The basic code, maybe, but everything else, the refinements, the market applications, the business model, that's all from your time with me, from my investment in you." I stared at him, feeling the floor shift beneath my feet. "Your investment in me?" The apartment, the clothes, the education, the connections. Do you think all of that was free? I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in you, Emma, and now you want to take what we built together and cut me out? I never asked you for any of that. No, but you took it. You lived here, You wore the clothes, you benefited from my network. And now you think you can just walk away with intellectual property developed under my roof? The conversation spiraled from there. He threatened legal action, claimed the algorithm was developed using his firm's resources. A lie, but who would believe me over Daniel Whitmore? He said he'd destroy my reputation before it even began, make sure no investor would touch me. "You're nothing without me, Emma," he said, his mask finally completely off. "I made you. Everything you are, everything you have, is because of me. Without me, you're just another immigrant kid with a computer science degree and delusions of grandeur." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in his California king bed in his penthouse apartment, wearing the La Perla nightgown he'd bought me, and felt like I was suffocating. Every object around me was his, chosen by him, paid for by him. Even my body felt like it belonged to him, shaped by his preferences, dressed by his taste, diminished by his words. The next morning, while he was at his morning workout, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I called my mother. "Emma?" Her voice was surprised, worried. It was 6 a.m. "Is everything okay?" "Mom," I said, and then I was crying, really crying, for the first time in months. "I need to come home." "Oh, baby," she said, and I could hear her switching to Mandarin, the language of my childhood, the language Daniel had forbidden me to speak in public. "Come home. Just come home." But when Daniel returned from the gym, he must have sensed something had shifted. He was extra attentive, extra charming. He apologized for the night before, said he was just stressed about the merger, that of course the algorithm was mine. "Look," he said, pulling me close, "I overreacted. How about this? We'll set up a company together. You'll be the CTO, I'll handle the business side. 50-50 partners. We'll build something amazing together." For a moment, I wavered. It would be so easy to say yes, to sink back into the comfortable prison I'd built around myself. But then I remembered my mother's voice, remembered the girl who'd coded through the night, fueled by nothing but ramen and dreams. "I need some time to think," I said. His face hardened. "Time to think? Emma, I'm offering you everything. A company, funding, connections. What more could you want?" "I just need a few days." "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "This is why you need me. You're too emotional, too impulsive. You don't think strategically." That afternoon, while he was at work, I did something I should have done months ago. I backed up my algorithm to multiple secure servers, ones he didn't know about and couldn't access. I documented every piece of code, every timestamp showing my work predated our relationship. I wasn't just protecting my work, I was protecting myself, but Daniel must have sensed my growing independence. Over the next week, he oscillated between rage and tenderness, threats and promises. He'd scream at me for being ungrateful, then buy me jewelry. He'd tell me I was worthless, then promise me the world if I'd just be reasonable. The breaking point came at his firm's annual gala. I was wearing a $10,000 dress he'd chosen, making small talk with his colleagues' wives, playing the role I'd perfected over 3 years. But inside, I was screaming. During dinner, one of his partners asked about my work. Before I could answer, Daniel cut in. "Emma's been my little project," he said, smiling that charming smile. "I found her at a conference, brilliant mind but completely unpolished. I've been molding her, teaching her how to navigate our world. She's come so far from that scared little girl with the thick accent and the cheap suit." The table laughed politely. I sat there, my face burning, realizing that to him, I had never been a partner or even a person. I was a project, a thing to be improved, shaped, owned. That night, I told him I was leaving. Which brings us back to where this story began, standing in his penthouse, suitcase in hand, listening to him tell me I was worthless without him. The studio apartment in Brooklyn was even smaller than I remembered, 400 square feet, a radiator that clanged all night, a view of a brick wall. But it was mine. I'd kept it all these years, paying rent even when I lived with Daniel. Some part of me must have always known I'd need an escape route. I sat on the narrow bed, my suitcase still packed beside me, and opened my laptop. The algorithm was there, safe, intact, mine. But Daniel's words echoed in my head. "You're nobody. You were nobody when I found you, and you'll be nobody when I'm done with you." For 3 days, I barely moved. I ordered takeout, ignored calls from the few friends I had left, and stared at my code. Every time I tried to work, I heard his voice. Every time I had an idea, I questioned whether it was good enough. He'd gotten so deep into my head that even alone, I couldn't escape him. On the 4th day, my mother showed up. She used the spare key I'd given her years ago, took one look at me, and pulled me into her arms. "My brave girl," she said in Mandarin. "My brave, brilliant girl." "I'm not brave, Mom. I'm scared." He was right. I don't know how to do this without him. She pulled back, held my face in her weathered hands. "You think you need him? Emma, you survived poverty. You survived being the only Asian girl in your computer science classes. You survived our struggles, our sacrifices. You think one spoiled rich boy can break you?" She stayed with me that night, making the soup she used to make when I was sick as a child. We talked in Mandarin, the words feeling like coming home after a long journey. She told me stories about my grandmother in Taiwan, who'd built a business from nothing after my grandfather died, who'd refused to remarry despite pressure from everyone around her. "You come from strong women," my mother said. "Women who build things, women who survive. Don't let anyone make you forget that." The next morning, I woke with new determination. I set up a workspace in my tiny apartment, turning the kitchen table into a command center. I started refining the algorithm again, but this time I added something new, a function that analyzed market sentiment around women-led startups, identifying investment opportunities that traditional firms overlooked. The data was staggering. Women-led companies were consistently undervalued despite showing better returns over time. My algorithm could identify these opportunities before the market caught on. It was more than just a trading tool. It was a way to reshape how investments worked. I spent 18 hours a day coding, fueled by anger and instant coffee. When doubt crept in, when Daniel's voice got too loud in my head, I'd call my mother, and she'd remind me who I was before him, who I could be after him. 2 weeks into my self-imposed exile, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Daniel had been calling from different numbers, leaving messages that alternated between threats and pleas. But something made me pick up. "Emma Chen?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "Yes?" "My name is Patricia Reeves. I'm a senior editor at Forbes. We're doing a feature on emerging technologies in fintech, and your name keeps coming up." My heart stopped. "My name? Where? How?" "One of our researchers found a paper you published 2 years ago about predictive algorithms in emerging markets. It was, well, frankly, it was brilliant. We've been trying to track you down, but you seem to have disappeared from the tech scene." 2 years ago, before I'd completely lost myself in Daniel's world, when I still had enough of myself left to submit papers to journals. "We'd like to interview you for the piece," Patricia continued. "But more than that, we're considering you for our annual 30 Under 30s cover story. The theme is Invisible Innovators, Brilliant Minds Working Outside the Traditional System." I couldn't speak. The Forbes cover was something Daniel obsessed over, something he'd been angling for since I'd known him. And here they were, calling me, not because of his connections or influence, but because of work I'd done before he'd even entered my life. "Ms. Chen, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed. "Yes, I'm here. I'd be honored." "Excellent. Can you come to our offices tomorrow? And Ms. Chen, we'd particularly love to hear about your current project. Our sources suggest you're working on something revolutionary." After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Then I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. The Forbes interview was scheduled for 2 p.m. the next day. I spent the morning preparing, not just my presentation, but myself. I went to Chinatown, to the beauty salon my mother had been going to for 20 years. The stylist, Mrs. Liu, clicked her tongue when she saw my hair. "What did you do to yourself?" she asked in Mandarin. "This isn't you." "Make me look like myself again," I said. She cut away the expensive highlights, the carefully maintained style Daniel had preferred. What emerged was my natural black hair, glossy and thick, styled simply but elegantly. I looked in the mirror and saw hints of the girl I used to be. I wore my own clothes to the interview, not the designer pieces Daniel had bought, but a simple black dress I'd owned since college, and a blazer my parents had given me for graduation. I looked professional, but authentic. I looked like myself. The Forbes offices were intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern art, the quiet hum of importance. But I'd been in intimidating rooms before. I'd pitched to venture capitalists, presented to Daniel's colleagues, navigated his world. The difference was, this time I was there as myself, not as someone's accessory. Patricia Reeves was not what I expected. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "Emma Chen," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've been looking forward to this. Your paper on predictive modeling in emerging markets was one of the most innovative things I've read in years. Where have you been hiding?" I could have given her the polished answer, the one that made me look strategic and calculating. But something about her directness made me want to be honest. "I got lost," I said simply. "I let someone convince me I wasn't ready, that I needed to be improved, polished, fixed. I've spent 3 years being shaped into someone else's vision of success." Her eyes sharpened with interest. "And now? Now I'm building something on my own terms. An algorithm that doesn't just predict markets. It identifies and corrects systemic biases in investment patterns, particularly around women and minority-led ventures." "Show me," she said. For the next 2 hours, I presented my work. Not the simplified version I'd shown to Daniel's friends, not the dumbed-down explanation I'd been trained to give. The real thing, complex, innovative, revolutionary. Patricia asked sharp questions, challenged my assumptions, pushed me to defend my methodology. It was exhilarating. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "But Emma, I have to ask, why now? What changed?" I thought about lying, about giving her a story that made me look strong and decisive from the start. But the truth was more powerful. "Someone told me I was worthless without them," I said, and for a moment I believed it. But worthlessness, it turns out, can be freedom. When you have nothing left to lose, when someone has stripped away everything they gave you, you remember what was always yours. My mind, my ideas, my code, those were always mine. Patricia leaned back, studying me. "Would you be willing to share that story? The real story, because Emma, what you're building is impressive, but who you are, a woman who reclaimed herself, who's building technology to lift others, that's the cover story." I thought about Daniel, about the threats he'd made, the connections he had. Then I thought about my mother's words, about the women I came from, about the girl who'd coded through the night with nothing but determination. "Yes," I said, "I'll tell the whole story." The photo shoot was surreal. They didn't try to make me look like someone else. No heavy makeup, no borrowed designer clothes. Just me, in my simple black dress, standing in front of walls of code projected behind me. The photographer kept saying, "Give me that look, the one that says you know something they don't." It wasn't hard. I did know something. I knew what it was like to lose yourself and find yourself again. I knew what it was like to build something from nothing. I knew what it was like to be underestimated and to prove everyone wrong. The article wouldn't come out for another month, but Patricia called me a week after the interview. "Emma, I wanted to give you a heads up. Word about your algorithm has gotten out. We've had 3 major investment firms call asking for your contact information. Also," she paused, "Daniel Whitmore's office called. He seemed upset about the article." What did you tell him? That Forbes doesn't reveal sources or content before publication. But Emma, you should know. He made some allegations about intellectual property theft. My stomach clenched, but I was ready for this. I have documentation proving all my work predates our relationship, or was done independently. Good, because Emma, what you're building could change everything. Don't let him or anyone else stop you. Over the next few weeks, everything accelerated. Investment firms started calling, not because of Daniel's connections, but because of my work. I took meetings, but on my terms. I met them in my Brooklyn studio, served them coffee from my bodega, showed them my code on my old laptop. If they wanted to invest, they had to see the real me, not some polished version. 3 firms made offers. I turned them all down. Instead, I did something that would have horrified Daniel. I went to community investors, women who'd built their own businesses, immigrants who understood the struggle, people who'd been overlooked by traditional finance. I raised my seed funding $10,000 at a time, building a network of investors who believed not just in the algorithm, but in the mission. My parents were my first investors. They put in $5,000, money they'd saved for emergencies. This is an emergency, my father said when I protested. My daughter finally remembering who she is? That's worth everything. The algorithm officially launched as Equality AI 3 weeks before the Forbes article was due to publish. In its first week, it identified 17 undervalued women-led startups. Within a month, 3 of those companies had successful funding rounds, with early investors seeing 40% returns. But the real validation came from the founders who reached out to me. Women who'd been told their ideas weren't scalable, minorities who'd been passed over by traditional VCs, immigrants who'd been told they didn't understand the American market. They all had the same story: brilliance dismissed, potential ignored, worth questioned. Your algorithm saw what they couldn't, one founder told me. It saw that different doesn't mean less valuable. Daniel, meanwhile, was imploding. He sent legal threats that his own lawyers wouldn't pursue once they saw my documentation. He spread rumors that I'd stolen from him, but people who mattered knew better. His firm, it turned out, had been inflating returns for years, something that might have continued if he hadn't drawn attention to himself by attacking me. The night before the Forbes article was released, he called me one last time. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Emma, he said, and his voice was different, desperate. Please, pull the article. I'll give you anything. I'll fund your company. I'll leave you alone. Just don't do this. Do what, Daniel? Tell the truth? You're going to destroy me. No, I said calmly. I'm going to ignore you. The article isn't about you. It's about me. You're just a footnote, a cautionary tale about what happens when women let others define their worth. You were nothing without me. I was everything without you, I interrupted. I just forgot for a while. The Forbes cover hit newsstands on a Tuesday. The headline read, "The Invisible Revolution: How Emma Chen Built an Algorithm to Find What Others Miss." The photo was perfect. Me, standing confident and unpolished, with code streaming behind me like wings. But the best part was the subtitle, "From Worthless to Worth Billions: One Woman's Journey from Toxic Relationship to Tech Revolution." The article went viral within hours, not just in tech circles, but everywhere. Women shared their own stories of being told they were worthless, of having their contributions minimized, their potential dismissed. The hashtag #SharNeverWorthless started trending. Investment poured in, not just money, but partnerships, collaborations, opportunities. Microsoft wanted to integrate the algorithm into their platforms. Goldman Sachs wanted to license it for their diversity initiatives. The UN invited me to speak about using technology to address systemic bias, but the moment that mattered most came a week after the article published. I was having dinner with my parents in Chinatown, celebrating in the small restaurant where they'd had their first date 40 years ago. The owner, who'd known me since I was a child, had put up a copy of the Forbes cover on the wall. "Our Emma," she kept saying to other customers. "Our Emma made it." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. but something made me look. Emma, I've been following your story. I'm Sarah Whitmore, Daniel's sister. He doesn't know I'm reaching out. I wanted to thank you. I've been in my family's shadow my whole life, told I wasn't smart enough for the family business, not tough enough for finance. Your story gave me the courage to start my own firm. I'm funding women-led startups exclusively. Would love to connect if you're open to it. I showed the message to my parents. My mother smiled, that knowing smile she'd had when I was a child, and she saw me figure out a difficult problem. You see, she said in Mandarin, when you stand in your truth, you give others permission to stand in theirs. 6 months later, Equality AI was valued at $500 million. We'd helped fund 73 startups led by underrepresented founders with an average return of 67%, double the industry standard. My team had grown to 50 people, all brilliant minds who'd been overlooked by traditional tech companies. Daniel's firm, meanwhile, was under SEC investigation. His investors were pulling out. The golden boy image he'd cultivated for so long had tarnished beyond repair. I heard through mutual contacts that he'd had to sell the penthouse, that he was living with his parents in Connecticut, trying to rebuild. I could have felt vindicated. I could have gloated. But mostly, I felt nothing. He was irrelevant to my story now, a chapter I'd closed and moved past. The second Forbes feature came exactly 1 year after I'd walked out of his apartment. This time, it wasn't just about me. It was about the movement Equality AI had started. The cover featured 10 founders we'd helped fund, all women and minorities who'd built unicorn companies after being rejected by traditional VCs. Patricia Reeves interviewed me again, this time in my new office. Not some gleaming corporate tower, but a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, filled with plants and natural light and the sound of 30 different languages being spoken by my diverse team. "A year ago, someone told you that you were worthless without them," she said. "What would you tell that person now?" I thought for a moment, looking around at what I'd built, at the lives we'd changed, at the potential we'd unlocked. "I'd thank them," I said finally. Because in trying to convince me I was worthless, they forced me to discover my worth. And it turns out, my worth had nothing to do with them and everything to do with the value I could create for others. And what would you tell someone who's being told they're worthless right now? That worthlessness is a lie told by people who need you to be small so they can feel big. That your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. And that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are so you can finally see who you're not. The interview continued, but my mind wandered to all the messages I'd received over the past year. Thousands of women sharing their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. Each one proving that worth isn't given or taken. It's inherent, waiting to be recognized and claimed. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another startup founded by an immigrant woman had just closed a Series A round based on our algorithm's recommendation. Another invisible innovator made visible. Another person told they were worthless, proving exactly how wrong that assessment was. That night, I had dinner with my parents again. We went to the same restaurant in Chinatown, sat at the same table. But everything was different. I wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't ashamed of where I came from. I spoke Mandarin loudly, laughed at my father's jokes, held my mother's weathered hands with pride. "You know what the best part is?" my mother asked, looking at the Forbes cover still hanging on the wall. "What?" "You didn't become successful despite us, despite your background. You became successful because of it. Because we taught you to work hard, to persist, to build things with your own hands. That boy tried to make you forget that, but it was always in you." She was right. Every line of code I'd written was infused with the work ethic of parents who'd sacrificed everything. Every algorithm was built with the persistence of people who'd crossed oceans for opportunity. Every success was rooted in the strength of those who'd been told they didn't belong, but kept going anyway. 3 years have passed since that night in Daniel's penthouse. Equality AI is now valued at $3 billion. We've helped launch over 400 companies, creating thousands of jobs and generating billions in returns. I've spoken at the UN, testified before Congress about bias in investment algorithms, and yes, I've been on the Forbes cover 3 more times. Daniel tried to make a comeback last year. He started a new firm focused on traditional investment strategies. It failed within 6 months. I heard he finally went to therapy, finally started confronting the toxic patterns he'd inherited from his own family. His sister Sarah and I have become friends, maybe even allies. She's funded dozens of women through her firm, each one a small rebellion against the family that told her she wasn't enough. But this story isn't really about Daniel, or even about me. It's about every person who's been told they're not enough, not ready, not worthy. It's about the quiet revolution happening in spare bedrooms and small apartments where people are building dreams despite being told they can't. It's about the power of remembering who you are when someone has tried to erase you. Last month, I gave a talk at UC Berkeley, in the same auditorium where I'd first presented my algorithm as a scared undergraduate. The room was packed this time, standing room only. In the front row sat a young woman, Southeast Asian, probably first generation like me, taking notes with the same intensity I'd once had. After the talk, she approached me, clutching a worn laptop. "Ms. Chen," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I have this idea, this algorithm that could revolutionize how we track medical supplies in developing countries. But everyone says it's too ambitious, that I should focus on something smaller, more manageable." I looked at her, brilliant, hungry, doubting herself because others doubted her first. "Show me," I said. For the next hour, she walked me through her code. It was rough, unpolished, but underneath was something revolutionary, just like mine had been, just like all of ours are before someone tries to sand away our edges. "It's brilliant," I told her. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." But what if they're right? What if I'm not ready? I thought about Daniel, about the 3 years I'd lost believing I wasn't ready. Then I thought about my mother, my grandmother, all the women who'd built things from nothing. "You're ready when you decide you're ready," I said. "Your worth isn't determined by someone else's timeline. Build it. Build it exactly as you envision it. And when people tell you it's too much, too ambitious, too anything, build it anyway." She left with my direct contact, a promise of mentorship, and most importantly, belief in herself restored. Watching her go, I realized this was the real success. Not the valuations or Forbes covers, but the ability to reflect back to others the worth they've always had. That evening, I stood on the roof of our Brooklyn office, looking out at the city that had once seemed so intimidating. Manhattan glittered across the river, those towers of power and privilege that had made me feel so small. But now I saw them differently. Not as monuments to people like Daniel, but as buildings full of people like me. People who'd been told they weren't enough, working to prove otherwise. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Emma, did you see the news?" "What news?" "That magazine, Forbes. They named you one of the most powerful women in tech, more powerful than all those people who said you were nothing." "Mom, that's not why I did this. I know, baby, you did it to help others. But isn't it nice when the universe keeps score?" I laughed, remembering that night 3 years ago when I'd stood in Daniel's apartment, feeling worthless. If I could go back and tell that girl one thing, it would be this. The people who tell you you're worthless are usually the ones most threatened by your worth. Their words are not prophecy, they're projection. And the space between being called worthless and proving your worth, that's where you discover who you really are. My algorithm had evolved far beyond what I'd originally imagined. It now didn't just identify undervalued companies. It predicted which founders would thrive despite systemic barriers. It found patterns in resilience, algorithms for persistence. It quantified what VCs had missed, that struggle creates strength, that diversity drives innovation, that the best ideas often come from those who've been told their ideas don't matter. Last week, we announced our biggest initiative yet, a $100 million fund dedicated entirely to founders who've been rejected by traditional VCs at least 3 times. We're calling it the Worthless Fund, a tongue-in-cheek name for something deadly serious. Every rejection letter becomes a qualification. Every no gets them closer to our yes. Daniel's words, "You're worthless without me," have become our unofficial motto, printed on t-shirts our founders wear proudly. We've reclaimed the word, transformed it from a weapon into a badge of honor, because we've all been called worthless by someone who couldn't see our worth, and we've all proven them wrong. The applications for the fund flooded in. Thousands of founders, each with a story of being dismissed, diminished, denied, but also each with unshakable belief in their vision. Reading through them, I saw myself multiplied infinitely. All of us who'd been told we were too much or not enough, too ambitious or not ready, too different or not different enough. One application stopped me cold. It was from a woman in Ohio, developing sustainable agriculture technology. She'd been rejected 17 times. One VC had told her, "You're a nobody from nowhere with an idea that doesn't matter." I approved her application immediately and flew out to meet her myself. Her technology could revolutionize farming in drought-affected areas. It could save lives, feed communities, change the world. But she'd almost given up, almost believed the voices telling her she was nobody. "They were so confident when they said it," she told me, tears in her eyes. Like it was just a fact, like my worthlessness was objective reality. "The most dangerous lies," I said, "are the ones told with complete confidence by people we think know better. But here's what I've learned. The people who are quickest to call others worthless are usually the ones whose own worth is built on making others feel small." We funded her company. Within 6 months, she had pilot programs in 3 countries. Within a year, she was on the cover of Time magazine. The VC who'd called her a nobody, he reached out, wanting to invest in her Series B. She politely declined. This pattern repeated over and over. The founders we backed didn't just succeed, they soared. They built companies that traditional VCs scrambled to invest in later at 10 times the valuation. They created jobs, solved problems, changed industries. They proved that worth isn't about pedigree or connections or fitting into someone else's mold. It's about vision, determination, and the courage to build something when everyone says you can't. My own journey became a template, but each founder wrote their own story. The single mother who built a billion-dollar edtech company from her kitchen table. The refugee who created a logistics platform that revolutionized supply chains. The woman with dyslexia who developed AI that helps millions of neurodivergent people navigate the digital world. Each one had been called worthless. Each one had proved that assessment spectacularly wrong. But success, I learned, comes with its own challenges. As equality AI grew, I faced new pressures, new voices trying to define my worth. Board members who wanted me to be more aggressive, more like the male CEOs they were used to. Competitors who spread rumors that I was too emotional to lead a major company. Media outlets that focused on my relationship history rather than my innovations. The old me might have tried to change, to become what they expected. But I'd learned my lesson. Worth isn't about meeting others' expectations. It's about exceeding your own. So I led my way, with empathy, with consideration, with the understanding that comes from having been underestimated. When male CEOs criticized my soft leadership style, our returns spoke for themselves. When competitors poached our talent, those employees often came back, missing the culture we'd built. When media outlets ran hit pieces, our community of founders rallied around us, sharing their own stories of transformation. The truth is, being called worthless was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because the pain was valuable, pain is just pain, but because it forced me to excavate my own worth, to build it from scratch, to make it unshakable. Daniel thought he was destroying me when he said those words. Instead, he freed me. I think about him sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with something approaching pity. He's still trapped in his narrow definition of worth, money, power, control over others. He'll never know the joy of building something that matters, of lifting others up, of discovering that worth multiplied is worth magnified. Last month, we held our first Equality AI Summit. 3,000 founders, investors, and innovators gathered in Brooklyn. The keynote speaker was my mother. She spoke in Mandarin with real-time translation about sacrifice and dreams, about believing in your children, especially when the world doesn't, about the worth that can't be measured in dollars but shows up in lives changed. She got a standing ovation. Afterwards, founders lined up to thank her, to share their own stories of parents who'd believed in them when no one else did. She held court like a queen, dispensing wisdom and warmth in equal measure. "You know what?" she said to me later, as we walked through the streets of Chinatown where she'd worked all those years. "That boy who said you were worthless? We should send him a thank you card." "Mom, no. I'm serious. Without him, you might still be making his coffee and doubting yourself. Sometimes the worst things people say to us become the fuel for our best selves." She was right, of course. The words meant to diminish me had instead defined me, not as worthless, but as someone who knew exactly what worth meant, because I'd had to build it myself, defend it myself, prove it myself. That night, I did something I'd been putting off for 3 years. I wrote Daniel a letter, not to send. He didn't deserve my words, but for myself, for closure. "Daniel," I wrote, "you told me I was worthless without you. You were half right. I was worth less with you, less than I was capable of, less than I deserved, less than I could be. Your greatest gift to me was showing me exactly how small your vision of worth was, so I could build something bigger. The company I built, the lives we've changed, the revolution we've started, none of it would have happened if you hadn't tried to convince me I was nothing. Because in proving you wrong, I discovered I was everything. Not everything to you. You were never capable of seeing it. But everything to myself, to my community, to the thousands of founders who needed someone to see their worth when the world couldn't. So thank you for calling me worthless. It was the push I needed to prove my worth was never yours to define." I burned the letter on the roof of our office, watching the smoke disappear into the Brooklyn sky. With it went the last traces of doubt, the final whispers of his voice in my head. What remained was clarity, purpose, and the unshakable knowledge that worth is not given or taken. It's recognized and claimed. Today, as I stand in my office, our office really, because it belongs to everyone who's been told they don't belong, I see worth everywhere. In the code being written by brilliant minds previously overlooked, in the companies being built by founders previously rejected, in the problems being solved by people previously ignored. The Forbes magazine from that first cover story sits framed on my wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Next to it hangs something more precious. A photo of my parents from their first year in America, young and scared but determined. They're standing in front of the tiny apartment where they started with nothing but hope and each other. Their worth couldn't be measured then in dollars or degrees, but it was infinite. The worth of people who believe in tomorrow even when today is impossible. Below those photos, I've hung the rejection letters our founders received before we funded them. Not scalable. Too risky. Founder lacks necessary background. Idea has no merit. Each rejection now represents a company worth millions or billions. Each dismissal now proves the dismisser's blindness, not the founder's worthlessness. Sometimes young women reach out to me, always with the same story. Someone, a boyfriend, a boss, a parent, a society, has told them they're not enough. They're worthless without someone else's approval, guidance, love. They write to me at 2 a.m. at their lowest points when they almost believe it. I tell them what I wish someone had told me that night in Daniel's apartment. Worthlessness is not a state of being. It's a weapon used by people who fear your worth. The very fact that someone is trying to convince you you're worthless means they see something in you that threatens them. No one wastes time trying to diminish something that's truly insignificant. I tell them about the space between being called worthless and claiming your worth. That sacred space where you get to decide who you are without anyone else's input. It's terrifying and liberating and necessary. It's where you learn that worth isn't about being perfect or polished or approved of. It's about being authentically, unapologetically yourself. The algorithm I built has evolved beyond anything I imagined. It doesn't just identify undervalued companies anymore. It predicts which founders will thrive despite adversity. The pattern is clear. Those who've been told they're worthless but refuse to believe it. Those who've been rejected but kept building. Those who've been dismissed but kept dreaming. They're the ones who change the world. Because here's what Daniel never understood, what none of the people who call others worthless understand. Worth is not a zero-sum game. My worth doesn't diminish yours. Your success doesn't threaten mine. When we lift each other up, we all rise. When we see each other's worth, we multiply it exponentially. The company is now bigger than anything Daniel's firm ever achieved. We've created more value, changed more lives, solved bigger problems. But that's not the victory that matters. The victory is in the founder who messages me to say she almost gave up until she heard my story. The victory is in the immigrant kid who sees that someone who looks like him made it. The victory is in every person who's been called worthless and responds, "No, I'm not." Tomorrow, Forbes is publishing another article. This one isn't about me. It's about the movement we've started. They're calling it the Worthless Revolution, documenting how thousands of people dismissed by traditional systems have built alternative paths to success. The cover features a mosaic of faces, founders we've backed, all holding signs with the words they were told: too ambitious, not ready, nobody, worthless. But in their eyes, you can see the truth. They're none of those things. They never were. They just needed someone to see it, to believe it, to invest in it. That's what we do now. We find the worthless and show them their worth. We fund the nobodies and help them become themselves. We invest in the dismissed and watch them soar. It's more than business. It's alchemy, turning pain into power, rejection into revolution. Sometimes I walk through Manhattan, past the building where Daniel's penthouse used to be. I don't feel anger or sadness or even triumph. I feel grateful. Grateful that his words pushed me to discover my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's assessment. Grateful that in trying to make me nothing, he accidentally made me everything I was meant to be. The truth is, we're all told we're worthless at some point. By people who should love us, by systems that should support us, by voices that should encourage us. And in that moment, we have a choice. We can believe them, shrink ourselves to fit their small vision of who we can be, or we can recognize the lie, reject the label, and build something that proves not just our worth, but the worth of everyone who's been similarly dismissed. I chose to build. So did thousands of others. And together, we're creating a world where worth isn't determined by pedigree or connections or someone else's approval. It's determined by vision, by persistence, by the courage to keep going when everyone says stop. Daniel was wrong about so many things, but he was most wrong about this. I was never worthless without him. None of us are worthless without the people who try to convince us we are. We're actually more valuable without them. Free to discover our true worth, unfiltered and unlimited. So to everyone who's been called worthless, who's been told they're nothing without someone else, who's been made to feel small so someone else can feel big, remember this. The people who call you worthless are usually the ones most threatened by your worth. Their words are not prophecy. They're fear, disguised as authority. Your worth is not negotiable. It's not dependent on someone else's validation. It's not measured by their metrics. It's yours, inherent and infinite, waiting to be claimed. And when you claim it, when you finally, fully own your worth, you don't just change your own life. You light a path for others to claim theirs. You become proof that worthless is just another word for they couldn't see it yet. The Forbes interview 3 years ago changed my life, but not in the way Daniel feared. It didn't destroy him. He did that himself. It didn't make me famous. That was never the point. What it did was start a conversation about worth, about who gets to define it, about what happens when we stop letting others define it for us. That conversation continues today in every company we fund, every founder we back, every person who reads our story and thinks, maybe I'm not worthless after all. Because you're not. You never were. You're just getting started. And if someone tells you otherwise, if someone tries to convince you that you're nothing without them, remember my story. Remember all our stories. Remember that being called worthless is often the first step toward discovering your infinite worth. The phone on my desk rings. It's another founder, another person who's been rejected and dismissed and told they're not enough. I answer with the same words I always use now, words that would have saved me years of pain if I'd heard them sooner. Tell me about your vision. I'm listening, and I already know you're worth it, because that's what we do now. We see worth where others see worthless. We invest in the dismissed. We bet on the broken, and we win. Every single time, because worth multiplied is the most powerful force in the universe. Daniel told me I was worthless without him. He was wrong. I wasn't worthless. I was priceless. I just needed to get away from him to see it. And now? Now I help others see it too. One founder, one investment, one revolution at a time. That's my story. But more importantly, it's our story. All of us who've been called worthless and proved that assessment spectacularly, beautifully, definitively wrong. We're not worthless, we're invaluable, and we're just getting started.